Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Focus your digital process automation efforts squarely on customer outcome. I'm Niamh Lorden, Digital Marketing Manager at FlowForma, and we are the host of today's event. With me today, we have Forrester's Vice President and Principal Analyst, Rob Koplowitz, and Mark Graham, Director of ICT at Beaumont Hospital. I would like to thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping and offer a few tips for viewing today's webinar. Please note, today's webinar is being recorded. If you have trouble logging into audio or any other issues during the webinar, you can email info@flowforma.com for assistance. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted, but you can use the Q&A function on your right-hand side to ask questions, which we will answer at the end. After the webinar, we will send a copy of the recording to everyone, and we would appreciate it if you could complete a short feedback survey at the end. Now, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Rob Koplowitz, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, serving application development and delivery professionals. Rob's research at Forrester focuses on digital process automation, as well as artificial intelligence and cognitive computing. Rob has many years of experience in enterprise software consulting, product management, and strategy. Also today, we have Mark Graham, Director of ICT at Beaumont Hospital. Mark heads up the Information and Communications Technology Department at Beaumont. With 4,000 staff and 820 beds, the hospital provides emergency and acute care services across 54 medical specialties. Mark is passionate about digital transformation and the role of ICT in delivering excellent patient care. Rob and Mark, we're delighted to have you with us today. Rob, would you like to get started?
I would love to, Niamh. Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction. Thanks for everybody for joining today, and most especially thanks to Mark Graham for joining today. I've been stalking Mark for a long time because I think that the story of Beaumont Hospital, it just so well aligns with everything that we've been doing with our research. And it's just so interesting in terms of the way that Mark and the team at Beaumont have been able to cut through some really significant problems, and really to do it in the service of patient care. So as you see here at Forrester, we work with business and technology leaders to develop customer-obsessed strategies. And when we say customer-obsessed strategies, think of customer as a proxy for patient, it's a proxy for citizens, it's a proxy for employees, because all of these folks are actually involved in ultimately serving those folks that you work for. And in the case of Beaumont, they work for patients. So on the next slide, we'll kind of start to tee up what we're seeing that's going on and where automation is going. And I think where automation is going is right where it matters most. It's right where it can make the greatest difference, and it hasn't necessarily been that way. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and just throw this up and let folks kind of take a look at it. Digital transformation is nothing more than the buzzword du jour, and we have the thumbs up and we have the thumbs down. And the reason that we have the thumbs up and the thumbs down is that this is something that is incredibly interesting to our client base right now. And our client base tends to be a lot of folks in financial services, a lot of folks in insurance, banking, certainly a lot of folks in healthcare. And there has been a great deal of focus on this term, digital transformation, and it's been going on for a while. And it's something that you need to do, right? It's something that you need to do for the folks that are on the phone, and you're in retail, you're in financial services, you're in insurance. You certainly feel the pressure that's coming from your competitors. Industries like music, entertainment, and certainly retail have been disrupted by incredibly transformed, incredibly automated organizations. I think it's fair to say that nobody really wants to wake up one morning if you're a competitive environment and find out that Amazon has entered your market. They're just so incredibly efficient. They're so transformed. They're so highly automated that it becomes difficult to compete with them. And the same thing is true in things like healthcare, where you see these opportunities that are coming out around transformation, and you really align them more with patient care, right? So you're not necessarily thinking of yourself as much in a competitive situation as much as you're thinking in terms of efficiency and in terms of making what is often a very difficult process for a patient easier wherever you can. But they fail. They fail at an incredibly high rate. And this is something that we're tracking very carefully at Forrester. We see that the majority of things that are labeled digital transformation efforts fail, and they fail across a number of key vectors. They fail across organizational boundaries, they fail across legacy systems, and they fail because the task of automation is just too large and just too daunting. So I want to share on the next slide just a little story that I always find interesting, because I've seen this happening over and over again. So for the folks that may not be familiar with the term cargo cult, it's a story that I just love, and I think it so much speaks to me in terms of what I see going on around what has been traditional digital transformation efforts over the last few years. So during World War II, in the South Seas, Japanese first and then later Americans would show up on these very remote islands, and they would plow out a piece of the jungle, and then they would build a tower. And then lo and behold, what happened next was planes would come, and the planes would bring lots of cargo. And they would share that cargo with the islanders. And this was a good thing. Something had changed, there'd been a disruption. And so they would go off to the next island, and they would say, you know what, this is what we figured out. If you just plow a strip through the jungle and you build a tower, planes come and they bring you cargo. Well, obviously that's not the case. And the term cargo cult is now fairly commonly used to describe this type of activity by saying, I've seen something happen on the surface, but I don't really understand what's happening underneath the surface. And we see these chief digital officers getting hired, and the first thing they do is they build a great mobile app. In healthcare, they build a great mobile app for scheduling. I want to schedule an appointment, I can do that. Or I want to pick up a prescription, I can do that. And they don't hook up to anything that's going on in the back. So just like the planes never came, then you fire the chief digital officer, and it's happening over and over again. So let's move forward and look in the next slide and start to see some of the data and what's driving process efforts. So it's worth noting that process technology is a very hot topic right now. And I think it's a little bit like kale, Brussels sprouts, those things that your mom used to cook for you and you hated them because they were horrible. But now we've discovered that they're power foods and that we actually really need them and that you can serve them with bacon. So if we think about process, we're seeing a similar type of effect that's happening in the process world, where the goals of process are changing. So this used to be a fairly, I have to tell you, this would be a fairly mundane topic. Process, we had these very large, complex, traditional BPM type projects. They tended to be a fairly small number of folks that were involved. And they tended to lead to some fairly significant outcomes, but they didn't digitally transform the organization. So every 2 years we go out at Forrester and we survey process professionals. And most of the folks that respond to this survey are in fact process professionals. And they are mostly involved in developing some sort of automated software as part of that process. We asked them to look back 2 years ago. We asked them to tell us what they're focusing on now, which is that middle column, and then to project out 2 years. And I want you to take a look at the red line that goes down. 2 years ago, the primary focus of process improvement was cost reduction. If we look at it, what's going on today, it's 16%. And if we look at the projection 2 years out, it drops to 8%. Now I want you to take a look at the green line that goes from the bottom digital transformation. 2 years ago, it was at 13%. Today, it's almost a third. And 2 years out, it's almost half primary efforts. Now, it's worth noting all the things in the left column, they're deeply intertwined. You don't do one without doing the other. You don't have success in one without driving success in the others that are aligned with it. But also worth noting that the primary objective has changed. And we can see this in terms of folks looking at digital transformation as something that has a key effect on patients, on customers, on citizens. Now, there is a dirty little secret about this data. We love our data at Forrester. And there's something that sits behind this data that is really important to understand. We do this survey every 2 years. I mentioned that at the beginning. And then when I first saw this data, which we recently refreshed, I went back to my research associate and I said, wait a minute. This is the old data. This is the data from the last survey. And she said, no, it's not. It's not. It's the new data. We were both a little confused because it's almost identical. It's almost exactly the same. 2 years has passed, and my projections 2 years forward and what I'm working on today haven't changed. We made no progress in 2 years. And I think what we're going to dig into today are some of the causes as to why digital transformation is so difficult. Even though the goals are incredibly important, there are things that are standing in the way. And a lot of them are the types of things that are simply heavy lifting. A lot of automation, a lot of application development, a lot of work that goes on between the IT department and the business, which have traditionally been extremely difficult things to do. And what's different now between the good old days of BPM is that we have to do a lot of it. So we have to do it in a fundamentally different way. So let's look at the next slide and then just give a sense of how strategic this has become. If I look at the second line, I actually want to draw your attention to the second line here and ask, why are you doing process improvement? What is the role of process improvement in your organization? And again, we get back to that goal of it's important in terms of reducing costs and cycle times and error rates. And a third of the folks still say that's the case. And again, this was the role of traditional BPM. This is what built the big BPM companies that have done great work and continue to do great work and will continue to be relevant to your portfolio, very relevant to your portfolio. But look at the top line. It's a critical part of our business strategy. It directly supports initiatives like digital transformation, like customer service. Almost twice as many are now focusing on that as the goal. So this is actually a really big, a really significant change in terms of the role of process. And I think this is why process research and process professionals have become so important to us. Is this fundamental change in the role of process? It's become that superfood. It's become that kale and Brussels sprouts. I need this in order to be successful. I can't just call the digital agency and have them build me a rather expensive mobile application that is sitting on top of something that is fundamentally not automated. So let's move on to the next slide. And what I want to do here is just turn it over to Mark. So you've heard me for quite a bit now. I think what you're doing, Mark, is just very different. So let's talk a little bit about your objectives in the initiatives that you've been involved in.
Yeah, sure. So Beaumont has a history of using clinical systems and IT systems for the past 20-something years. We'd be one of the first hospitals in Ireland to have electronic ordering. So a doctor can place an order for a blood test. He would have a label on it, and the blood would go down to the labs and be analysed, and the result would come back electronically. So that, we've been doing that for 20-something years in Beaumont, and for that process alone is, there's lots of hospitals in Ireland that wouldn't have that capability, and a lot of paper would be used to order blood tests. So for many years, for the last 20-something years, we've been digitizing where we can and as much as we can. And I suppose from Beaumont's point of view, digital transformation is our key for the next 10 years at least. That top line you showed in your previous slide. is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to transform as much as we can from paper to electronic systems. I suppose the reasons for that is just really to provide better access to data for our clinicians. If you think of a patient who comes into our emergency department, they're very sick, they need treatment, and the doctor has to go find a paper note. And the paper note could be on a different floor. It could be in an offsite storage, depending on how long it is since you've been to the hospital. So for that clinician to make a decision or to treat you in the best way he can, he needs access to your previous clinical information, and that's what's driving our digital transformation, is to give access to our clinicians, as much real time as we can. So we've been building on the systems the systems that we've had for the past 20 years. We've been building on them with multiple platforms, just to try and provide the systems that our clinicians use to do their work on a daily basis and treat patients as best they can. I've had stories from clinicians who are saying that patients just have better outcomes when they have access to the data as soon as the patient arrives into ED. So for me, that's the driver. So digitizing as much as we can, so that people are not running around looking for pieces of paper to treat a sick patient. And as I said, the feedback from our clinicians is that anything we do digitize for them makes a huge difference to patient outcomes. So that will be our driver. And we're lucky because we have doctors who have trained in the United States, who have worked in the United States, and they've come back to Ireland after 10 or 15 years, and they've seen all the technology that's in the States, where Ireland might be a little bit behind technology-wise, and they're coming back with some really good ideas to us that we have a team in Beaumont who love new ideas and to get their hands on something to make them something better. So these doctors coming back to Ireland, we're tapping into them, and it's great for us to have access to that source of data and to help us digitize and have a strategy going forward. But it's a long process, and as I said, it's a 10-year. It's in the next 10 years. We're going to keep driving forward to digitize as much as we can.
So, Mark, if we move on to the next slide, I didn't exactly count the number of times you said patient, but it has to have been about 10 or 12. And so, that creates, in my mind, a different focus. And we look at process automation in general. Again, we see customers, patients, citizens coming to the forefront. One of the things that did come out of our data, and one of the things that I think really caught our attention in this survey, is the use of different types of methodologies that I don't think were really things that process professionals thought about. I actually don't think that process professionals and technology people, even to this day, truly understand the meaning of the terms that we're about to dive into. But we gave the folks a big mix of different types of methodologies as part of this survey, and this goes through things like traditional tools like BPMN as a process mapping tool. It would go into the use of Lean Six Sigma and different types of development methodologies. And interspersed among these different types of methodologies, we put in customer journey mapping and design thinking. And I just want to take a look at these dark blue and light blue lines to the right. So let's start with customer journey mapping. Again, Mark, you mentioned patients extensively there, and this is what's really popping to the top of this. So customer journey mapping, the use of this by process professionals increasing 57%, and then increasing significantly 26%. So these are just massive numbers. This creates, in our mind, a sea change in terms of how people are looking at process. Now, I think it's worth noting that as we dug into this deeper and started to get a sense of what does it really mean to serve a customer, what does it really mean to serve a patient, we started seeing some discord. So when a process professional says customer journey mapping, they're looking at something that an end user interfaces with, and how can I go about automating that back end system to make it smoother. when a customer experience professional looks at customer journey mapping, they're looking at a much more expansive definition. And you know, in true form, if I ask our customer experience people at Forrester, you know, what do you think of process professionals doing customer journey mapping? They say, well, process people don't even really understand it. And then if I ask the process professionals, what about the CX people? And they're like, oh, they're focused on all this stuff, like what happens when you enter, you know, when you walk in the front doors of the hospital, who do you first see? And that's not real. That's not real technology automation. That's not what we do. But both are right. They're both right in that they don't understand what the other is attempting to accomplish, and they need each other. And right now we have a fundamental disconnect. So I attended one of our customer experience journey mapping courses at Forrester, and what I found out over and over again was people were asking the questions: how do our process people fit into this? How do our process automation professionals fit into this? One note on this customer journey mapping line here. My research associate looked at this and she said, okay, so let's actually find out how often are technologists in the room when your CX professionals are working. And the answer came back, it was 30%. 30% of the time when folks go in and say, we need to have a better customer experience, patient experience, citizen experience, there are no technologists in the room. So the types of things we're going to talk about that Beaumont did in terms of automating processes, they don't even know that these things are possible because they don't have IT representation in the room. So the goals are correct. What we're trying to accomplish is absolutely correct. But the way that we're doing it, I think we have a big cultural problem to overcome in terms of the customer experience versus the automation of the process that sits below it. But our goals are correct. So we have some challenges there. I want to move on then to design thinking. Data on design thinking, the second column here, 55% increasing and 26% increasing. This is also interesting because one of the things I want to draw your attention to, and Mark actually shows us the work that was done at Beaumont, is it's really attractive. It's really simple. The interfaces are crisp. They're very easy. And they're being used by the people, not in the back room, but the people on the front lines with the patients. And when you start to roll out technology from a small number of people, when you move from the people in suits and ties in the back room are going to use this technology to drive down some costs associated with billing, to the people in the front are going to actually use this while sitting next to a patient, you have to have a really, really great user experience. And then eventually this stuff can move out directly to patients, to citizens. It can actually end up in the hands of the people that use your product in the end. So these things are two very, very important factors that are addressing process. Now, if we move on to the next slide, what I kind of want to vector over to is, Mark, during the interviews leading up to this, you talked a lot about the white coats. This is a different class of users, and I want you to explain, if you could, explain why that's so critical to Beaumont's success.
Yeah, so when you refer to white coats, we're referring to clinicians, to nurses, to doctors, allied health staff. So all the clinical staff on the front line, as you mentioned, Rob, is who are there treating the patients. So, you know, about 2 years ago, we shifted our focus to try and deliver our systems for the people on the front line, the clinical staff on the front line. And it's just to look at the processes, make them easier for them so that they're not spending time filling out paper forms, that the IT systems that they are using are not cumbersome and taking too long, so that they're actually spending more time with the patient. So that was really our focus. And that, as I said, about 2 years ago, we changed that. And it's been hugely successful because we formed a clinical advisory group meeting. So we have representation from, you know, as I said, from doctors, nurses, and allied health, and from across multiple directorates in the hospital. So, you know, surgery, neurosurgery, medicine, and there, you know, the meeting is always very well attended every fourth Monday. And it's where we can discuss the strategy. What do they need from IT to deliver? So rather than IT interpreting or trying to interpret what our clinicians need, we sit in the room, we hear what they have to say, we try and interpret that and go back to them a month later and go, is this what you mean? Is this what you need? So we're building systems for them as opposed to, and based on what they've told us, as opposed to us building systems or what we think they need. So that's been a huge change for us in the last 2 years. And again, the integration between ourselves and the clinical staff, and then there's business people then behind those, supporting those people, and we've got a huge crossover between between ourselves and the business and the clinical staff now because of the way we changed over the last 2 years. So most of our systems we will try and focus on building clinical systems, for the clinical staff. That's not to say we ignore the corporate. So at the moment we have probably 20 flows in FlowForma going through our system at the moment for HR. So again, in the background we do try and focus on keeping the corporate moving, but our focus was really on how we can improve the processes for our clinical staff, and it's really just about spending more time with the patient.
And Mark, I think it's worth noting, I'm sure you've seen this as well, you can't separate the front office from the back office. This is something that if you think about what the patient experience is, and you think about that role of the customer experience professional, sometimes it is sitting next to a clinician. Sometimes it's going to the next place that you have to go and having the paperwork not moved manually, but already there and ready for you. And sometimes it's things like just, better billing. Sometimes it's just, it's smoother billing. So we have in fact created this arbitrary front office, back office separation, but the patient journey exposes all of that. The patient, in order to have the best possible journey, goes through various stages that touch the front office and the back office. So you have to think about it holistically. I want to move on to the next slide.
Just in connection to that, is if you look at the data that we're capturing, that our clinicians are capturing, that does drive. There's a rich pool of data there with the back office use to drive process improvement. So, they can see, how many patients we're treating, what type of patients we're treating, and again, they can change processes. So the back office is getting a rich source of data to, and that's what their role in this would be to use that data to drive process improvement from their side of things. So, it's a win-win really.
Yeah, no, and I love how you're thinking about it. I want to actually move on to the next slide and talk about 3 things that have been tripping up our clients, and then folks, we're going to get to see what Beaumont's doing, which is really, really cool. So we looked at what's sitting behind the scenes. Why can't we drive digital transformation? Why are these things failing at such a high rate? And we mentioned 3 problematic areas, and at a 100,000-foot level, crossing organizational boundaries, crossing legacy systems, and then simply the sheer amount of automation that's required. So if we look at these three charts, and then just kind of draw your attention to the yellow, the gray, and the green lines. Yellow being all of my processes run this way, gray being many of them run this way, and green being most of them run this way. And you see that huge number on paper-based manual routing of tasks. Beaumont's done brilliant work with this, and I think it's really important to look at how that has changed the patient experience. The second piece is the electronic manual routing, and this is the one that really seems to trip up our clients, and where tools like FlowForma really come to the forefront. How are you doing it today? Well, today what I'm doing is I'm updating a spreadsheet. The literal description of this in the survey was I update a spreadsheet, I run macros, I email things around. That was the example we gave you as part of the survey. And there's just an awful lot of this that just runs around organizations. And this is really, if you're lying awake at night thinking about Amazon entering your market, this is the things that don't happen at Amazon. Everything is radically transparent. When you go to order something, when you go to get a status of everything, you can see exactly where everything is in the process, up to now, information that they're getting back from their carriers, from their providers that are actually moving the thing, that talks about how many stops before you actually get the product, or how and the same thing is true of their electronic delivery. spreadsheets that are moving through email are not visible to a system. You cannot get any sort of transparency out of them. They're a huge problem. And then the last one is packaged applications, which is something that has, what we've tended to think about. This is where process executes most effectively in your SAP, in your Oracle, in your Salesforce systems. And it's true, it does execute extremely effectively within those systems. Sometimes it's a little difficult to do the modifications within that system, and therefore we simply have not done them. And also things don't necessarily run particularly well across those systems. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Mark. If we look at the next slide, there's 3 questions that we have here around Beaumont and how they addressed paper and manual and integration with existing systems. And actually, Mark has some demos and some screenshots and things that I think are actually really, really cool.
Okay. So just to be clear, we have lots of paper-based processes still. We have lots of manual processes. You know, if you go and see a doctor today in Beaumont, he will still have a paper chart in front of him, and he will still write in that paper chart. So we have a long way to go on our digital journey. It's not from the want of trying to get rid of paper, but you know, it is a 10-year process that we're in, I think. But you know, so those processes exist across the country. I mean, there's a huge amount of paper in every hospital. You know, there is no electronic system that will replace those processes. So in Beaumont, we've, you know, for many years we've been just trying to chip away and do, you know, take small bits of the pie and try and just turn them into digital systems. You know, it'll cost, you know, many millions of euro to build a fully integrated shiny system, which we don't have the money for. So as I said, it's a bit by bit. It's just, you know, every week, every month, we do another little bit to turn something digital, and eventually we'll get to a point where we'll be paper-light, at least paper-light, if not digital. So that's what we're aiming towards. But to get there, because we won't have one fully integrated system and the funding to buy one fully integrated system, you know, your integration of existing systems becomes key. So I have a couple of slides. I'm going to talk through them now, and the slides go across a couple of different platforms, and you'll see how integration is absolutely key to pulling systems together. So if you look at this slide here, this is an old Delphi application. It's our hospital system. So it records basically everything that you need to know about the patient. Possible appointments, blood tests, blood results, X-ray results. So it's our old, it's a really old system. As I said, it's over 20 years old, and you know, all the doctors use this on a daily basis. It's their go-to place to treat their patients. Launched 14 systems in the middle of September, and a lot of them were FlowForma systems, and some were developed on C#, but a lot of them were developed on the FlowForma. So you'll see that there's a little circle there just off of it. There's an eForms button on the just above the circle there on the slide. And the eForms button, when a doctor launches that, he's basically launching giving himself access to FlowForma forms. And this patient here, who's I'm not sure the patient's name is, Bugs Bunny, I think it is. So this patient, the doctor can actually fill out 4 or 5 different forms on the patient. So if a doctor, he just chooses the form that he wants to do. For this example, I think he chooses a waiting list card, and he moves on to a waiting list card. So at this point, you'll see the patient's details are all filled in the boxes. So the patient's details have come from the old Delphi system and have been pre-populated into the first part of the flow. So again, saving the doctor's time. He doesn't have to start typing in all these boxes. It saves him a lot of time having to not having to type all this stuff in. It's coming directly from our electronic system. So I'm just going to run a little video, which is a training video we use for our doctors. So the first page that you can see here is the patient's details, and the doctor will just hit submit. Once he's launched the patient's details, he will hit submit. He's just choosing what type of referral he's doing, what the priority of it is. If it's an urgent appointment, then it'll give him an extra box, and he can say it's less than 4 weeks or less than 3 months, and so on. Once he's filled out the first form, we hit submit. The second page is he's a number of fields to fill in. So, and there's a couple of mandatory fields he has to fill in. So what's the procedure he's going to send the patient for? And as he types, it does a Google type search. So it's starting to offer him the types of procedures, and again with the diagnosis, as he types, it starts to offer him procedures that he can use. And then there's a couple of tick boxes and submit, and that's it. So after 30 seconds or so, the doctor has basically placed the patient on the waiting list. He doesn't have to fill out any cards, and that form is instantly in the admissions office to who wants to waiting list immediately. So there's no delay in the form reaching the admissions office. So really quick process. Doctors love it, and it's again, there's no filling out paper. At the end of the waiting list card, that's just a summary sheet of the waiting list card. So the FlowForma generates a PDF document, and that gets stored against the patient's record. It gets stored digitally against the patient's record, and it's kept forever. So there's a full record of the fact that the patient was sent for referral to the waiting list. The next one is this is our theatre notes. So again, this was part of our rollout in the middle of September. So if a doctor was in surgery, when he comes out of surgery, he would fill in a yellow sheet, and again, it was a paper process. So he chooses his patient from the system. Again, everything is pre-populated for him, and this is the procedure here. So he's basically saying what theatre was done in, what procedure he did on the patient. Again, it's a Google type search. What surgeon, who the assistant was, who was the anaesthetist, and basically a couple of free text fields where he's typing in exactly what he did with the patient. And the important there is the post-operation instructions. What that does is, so as the patient goes back up to the ward, the surgeon is letting the nursing staff on the ward know exactly what has to happen with the patient. You can see the system generates a PDF document, and that's a copy there of the PDF document that is then stored against the patient's record. So forever. So again, it's very clear, very easy to read. You can see there highlighted the waiting list card so within 2 minutes done, it's available in the document repository.
Three things I love about that story. Thing number one, traversing those legacy systems is traditionally very difficult to do, and it's been an impediment. Thing number two is you're actually taking manual and paper-based processes, which have generally been things that are very difficult for IT to get their arms around. You're automating them, and the third one, and the biggest one, is this is all done in service of patients and patient care. So if we move on to the next slide, I just want to talk about a couple of things that we're going to do differently to get there. The first thing is, without a doubt, what you saw was agile development. You saw things that are happening very rapidly. These are not extensive analysis type projects where months are spent analyzing the process. You're doing something quickly, you're doing something easily, and you're involving the right people. So, and this is consistent with the survey data that we see. With this huge move in process from waterfall technologies, the traditional way of doing these things in very large, complex ways, to very agile, much more quick wins that we have. And if you move on to the next slide, I think that this is really important because we're going to change the class of applications that we're actually building. So on the next slide, you see this massive shift to low code. So, you talked about things being developed previously in C#, things being developed under the underlying legacy systems. The move is on in a big way to doing this much more quickly. And from a data perspective, I'll just draw attention to the fact that we went from 43% of folks that are planning to use in-use or expanding use of low code in 2016 to 67% in 2017. So this approach is a very real part of driving digital transformation. And I think it's really important because on the next slide, there is an awful lot of work that has to be done. So what we call this area to the right, this kind of long tail of things that need to be automated, we call that the business developer zone. And we're kind of moving from these IT applications on the left, the things that IT has traditionally worked on. Still really important, by the way. These highly controlled applications aren't going away, but increasingly being augmented where processes are improved and they're smoothed out and they're automated by moving out to things like low-code tools to actually enable business and IT to work much more quickly. So if we move forward, this is where digital transformation happens. It happens out here. This is all that stuff that happens behind the scenes that's so darn difficult to get to. If we move forward from here, you know, what I really want to ask of Mark is, who's building these applications? This is a very different way of how you're approaching the actual building of these applications. And can you share with the audience how that's changed there?
So in the past, we very enthusiastic and dedicated group of IT staff, and you know, they would take an idea and run with it. Over years, they would take an idea and run with it, and try and develop it and give it back to the user. But the user, in the past, the users may not have been committed to the project, and we might have spent weeks or months developing something that what they have asked for, and we think they want to use. And you know, we've been a few times in the past, it's happened where the system doesn't get used, or you know, it partly gets, or 10% of it gets used, or you know, users would look at it and say, you know, well, I'm not doing that because IT are telling me to do it. And that was, I suppose, one of the mistakes we made in the past, where people look at it and go, well, IT are telling me to do it, you know, but I don't want to do it. I suppose the change, we've a small team of developers, and we've a small team of FlowForma trained staff, but their job, like when I took over as director of ICT some years ago, I was amazed at how well they knew the business. They knew the business needs, and they're not just developers and software people who write software. They're people who actually understand the needs of the business and understand how the business runs. And for that was really key to when I realized, you know, and saw the experience of the staff in Beaumont and how they function, how they understand the business. It was enlightening to me. But again, so all systems now are being built with the business and with the staff. No system gets passed or approved unless there's proper sponsorship, proper design with the users, and because as I said in the past, we've built stuff that was never used. And you know, when the business or when doctors or consultants are sponsoring a project, it gets used because they're developing it for themselves and for each other. So you know, it's a joint effort. You know, if they know exactly what they want and get it down, we will try and do our best to deliver that for them. So it's a joint effort, but it's really important that we're all committed to it. It's not just it's not seen as just an IT project, and projects are not just IT projects. You know, changing processes in the hospital is not just an IT project. You know, you don't just put an IT project in a system on top of a bad process. You try and change the process at the same time, and we have that engagement. As I said, it's been really positive the last couple of years for us, and yeah, we know when we develop something that it's something that will be used and will make a difference.
I think that's probably the most important point that we've had. So this has been, I mean, I love this story. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've been wanting to get deeper into the story at Beaumont for a very long time. And there's a bunch of stuff that we talked about today that has been really important, but probably the piece I think that's most important is as you're thinking about these processes and moving them forward, this is not an IT thing. This is not a business thing. This is a thing about automating what the business is doing, and the business needs to be deeply involved in that. And I love how you're doing it quickly and iteratively, because that pattern of I spent months and months analyzing and building it has led to a lot of failures. So I just want to make a couple of more comments before we turn it over to the audience and see if there's any questions. So on the next slide, one of the things that we see is that at the same time, these things are actually relatively familiar. Low code is not brand new. We've been at it for a while. It's a very, very well-proven technology. But if the world is changing, customers, patients, they're going to expect you to change with it. So on the next slide, you know, I would leave this with, you know, with the audience. Things are happening, particularly around the space of artificial intelligence. We're seeing new things that are emerging. As I talk to healthcare organizations, around the world, we see instances where folks are able to interact through voice devices. Doctors, nurses, sitting with a patient in a room are able to interface through voice so that they don't have to turn their back on the patient. They're able to take notes more effectively. The types of things that you're used to doing on your phone with Siri, in your kitchen with Alexa, are becoming real applications, and folks are thinking about that. We're seeing the infusion of external cognitive experience. We know that there are big vendors that are making big bets around artificial intelligence in healthcare, in particular, and the infusion of that external expertise into the experience is becoming increasingly important. And then, how are your processes running? We're seeing a big focus on, can a system actually look and find instances where processes are inefficient and suggest addressing root cause analysis as to why that process isn't running as efficiently as it might. So on the last slide, before we turn it over to Q&A, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts that I think were reinforced during the process of this. So if we advance here, start with your strategy and serve executive support. Mark didn't go deeply into it, but during the interview, one of the things that you talked about, Mark, was the executive support, the support at the CEO level was really, I think, a big differentiator. Let the user experience pros lead. So you placed your focus from the beginning on the patient and what the patient was experiencing and how the patient's experience was different as a result of this automation. Moving forward, the process is more critical than ever. So again, what you're doing here is you're automating processes, and some of this, taking paper out, automating it, being able to move it from floor to floor in a way that's seamless and transparent. It's not really super sexy all the time, but it's really, really important. And going forward, IT is not going to be able to do this by themselves. So your partnership between IT and the business is so important. The training videos you mentioned as you went at, this is one of our training videos for our doctors, which we didn't dive into the role of change management, but a really, really nice example of change management. And last but not least, technology standards and governance. One of the things that I think is really interesting at Beaumont, you made a bet on FlowForma. This is how we do this. And so we can train in a consistent way, we can build applications in a consistent way, and people are used to the user experience. And I think that sometimes that consistent standard approach is a little bit undervalued. So Neve, with that, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to you and the FlowForma team.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. So you've been listening to Rob from Forrester and Mark from Beaumont, so thank you both. We do have a few minutes for Q&A. If anyone has any questions right now, please pop them into the question box. And a good few have come in during the session. The first one, Mark, that I might turn over to you is, so people are asking, great, you rolled out these processes, you made some paper process digital using FlowForma. How did you get buy-in from staff and how quickly did that happen, Mark?
I suppose it wasn't an IT sell. We used our clinical people who had helped us design these processes to sell this to the business and sell them to the users. So again, it's people don't always like IT arriving at their desk to say, here's a new system. So we used our lead clinicians in the hospital to promote these systems to ensure we got buy-in. So medical grand rounds, posters around the hospital, but from the speaking from the consultants as opposed to IT speaking it. And I think when somebody looks at it and goes, oh, the doctor told me to do it, not IT, that honestly made a huge difference. It was we had a 2-week rollout, as I said, of 14 systems, and it was a really positive. It was really tough work for the team, for IT, but it was a really positive experience with the hospital, and lots and lots of positive feedback. So, as I said, but it wasn't IT telling them to do it. It was more to do with the consultants, saying this is the right thing to do. So I think just the mindset really helped.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Mark. The next question now I might direct at you, Rob. So someone here is asking, who is best placed in my organization to own digital transformation and to own that focus on the customer outcomes? Rob, could you answer that one for us?
Well, I think there's multiple parts to that. So I think the answer is who owns it, and I think who owns it increasingly is turning out to be the person that is responsible for the experience of the user. So if it's employee facing, it would be who's responsible for the employee experience. If it's patient facing, who's responsible for the patient experience. That end-to-end experience seems to be increasingly the defining factor. You saw that huge focus on customer journey. And I do believe that those folks understand the end-to-end process as well. But below that sits two other constituents that are really important. One is technology, who has to be a partner in this as well. You can't automate without the technology folks. And again, picking a technology, standardizing on it to handle, you know, the common workloads that you're trying to automate becomes really important. And picking a technology that you can do this with really quickly becomes really important. So and speed has become a really important defining factor. The third one is the business. So Mark talks about the doctors and the nurses over and over again. And if the doctor says this and they understand how to best run their processes, what you don't want to necessarily do is go into the business of automating what you're doing today, because it may not be remotely efficient. And the people that see those inefficiencies best are the people that are out there trying to serve your customers or your patients on a daily basis. So between the experienced people and the technology people in the business, you have a three-part partnership. I do think that the experienced people are probably the ones that probably have to be in the lead position. And then lastly, don't do it without executive support. You know, we mentioned a couple of times during the course of this that this came from the CEO at Beaumont, and that I think is the piece that has been really, really interesting to me, and why this initiative. Mark, you keep saying it's a 10-year initiative, and I'm certain it is, but 10 years is a short horizon. You're doing this really quickly, and you're gaining business value almost immediately. And I think that the fact that this came from the top down is really, really important, really critical factor.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. So another question for you, Mark. So Michael here is asking, what devices are your clinicians using in Beaumont to enter data?
Mainly on PCs. We have trialed a number of mobile devices around the wards, but we have a real lack of infrastructure on the wards from a Wi-Fi point of view. So we're actually in the middle of going to look at what sort of Wi-Fi infrastructure we can get out and put into Beaumont for next year. So we don't have the infrastructure for mobile devices yet. So it's mainly all either PCs or laptops, whichever their preference is. But we haven't moved to mobile devices yet.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. So we're coming up to the end of our 1-hour session together. So I would just like to thank everyone for watching our session today. You've been listening to Rob from Forrester and Mark from Beaumont Hospital. If you'd like to discover more about how FlowForma process automation can help you on your digital transformation journey, just visit flowforma.com, and there you can sign up to a free 30-day trial, or you can book a one-to-one demo with one of our experts. You can also find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thank you all for attending today, and a special thanks to Rob and Mark for speaking with us today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Neve.